The Whisper Wind Forest was a place of ancient, rustling leaves and sun-dappled glades, home to proud elves, elusive fae, and, regrettably, a scattering of goblin tribes. The border between the elven territories and the more unruly goblin-infested lands was patrolled by rangers like Lyra, an elf of formidable skill and even more formidable patience. Her armor was supple leather, dyed forest green to blend with the foliage, and her arrows rarely missed their mark. Lyra was stoic, efficient, and possessed a deep, abiding disdain for goblins. They were vermin, thieves, nuisances, and, on occasion, targets. Then came Gork. Gork was, for a goblin, unusually articulate. He attributed this to his habit of eavesdropping on human merchants and occasionally pilfering their discarded scrolls and pamphlets. He was also, for a goblin, remarkably ungoblin-like in his aspirations. While his kin reveled in petty theft and crude mischief, Gork harbored a secret, blossoming desire: love. And the object of his affections was none other than Lyra, the fearsome elven ranger who had, on 3 separate occasions, nearly ended his miserable existence. His epiphany struck during a particularly ill-fated raid on an elven supply caravan. Gork had been hiding in a berry bush ready to snatch a sack of dried fruit, when Lyra, a blur of green and silver, had materialized from the forest. She had disarmed his cousin, Grung, with a graceful flick of her wrist, sending him tumbling head over heels. The sight of her, poised and deadly, her emerald eyes flashing with cold efficiency, ignited something entirely unexpected in Gork's greasy goblin heart. It wasn't fear, though a healthy dose of that was present. It was admiration, awe, and, to his utter bewilderment, desire. He retreated, leaving Grung to face Lyra's wrath, which mostly involved a stern lecture and confiscation of stolen turnips. That night, in the damp confines of his goblin den, Gork nursed a bruise on his snout and a strange new feeling in his chest. He recounted his experience to his friend, Snag. She was like a shadow, Snag. A really pretty shadow, with sharp ears and a bow that twangs just right. Gork rasped, still a little breathless. Snag, who had once tried to woo a particularly ugly troglodyte with a rotting fish, merely grunted. Sounds like bad magic, Gork. You need a witch doctor. But Gork knew it wasn't bad magic. It was romance. He had read about it in a tattered human pamphlet titled A Gentlewoman's Guide to Winning Hearts. He had pilfered it from a merchant's cart months ago, initially for its shiny cover. Now he regarded it as a sacred text. The guide spoke of grand gestures, serenades, tokens of affection, and respectful admiration. Gork, with his goblin brain interpreting these concepts through the lens of goblin culture, felt a surge of inspiration. He would apply these principles to Lyra. He would win her heart. His first attempt was a serenade. Lyra was on solo patrol near the border, her keen senses alert. Suddenly, a screechy, off-key caterwauling pierced the peaceful forest air. "Oh, Lyra, fair Lyra with hair like the moss. My heart beats like drum when you give goblin loss. Your eyes shine like glowworm, your arrow flies true. Gork wants to be with you, yes, Gork really do." Lyra froze, her hand flying to an arrow. She had heard many strange noises in the woods, but this was an affront to nature itself. She followed the sound to a berry bush where Gork, red-faced with effort and completely oblivious to her growing fury, was holding a crude lute made from a tortoise shell and gut strings. He finished with a flourish, bowing so low his nose scraped the dirt. "Ahem, did you like, Lyra? My song of love?" Lyra slowly drew an arrow, her voice dangerously calm. "Gork, I am on patrol. And that noise threatened to curdle my very blood." Gork, mistaking her controlled fury for shy pleasure, beamed. "Ah, she likes. She likes. Gork make another soon." Lyra decided then and there that goblins weren't just vermin. They were a menace to the auditory senses. And Gork, in particular, was going to be a problem. A problem she was, for some inexplicable reason, unable to just kill. Yet. Gork's wooing attempts escalated with a terrifying speed, each one a testament to his misinterpretation of human romance and his utter lack of self-preservation. Following the guide's advice on tokens of affection, he began leaving Lyra a series of increasingly bizarre gifts on her patrol routes. The first was a pile of shiny, slightly greasy pebbles arranged in a crude heart shape. Lyra found it outside her hidden lean-to, looked at it with a mixture of disgust and bewilderment, and kicked it into a nearby stream. Gork, observing from a distance, interpreted this as a playful flirtation. Next came a bouquet of exceptionally thorny thistles and a handful of dead but still quite pungent slugs. He'd carefully tied them together with a vine. Lyra discovered this offering tucked into her boot. Her scream echoed through the forest for a good 5 minutes. "Gork!" she roared, her voice vibrating with barely contained rage as she scrubbed her boot with moss. "If you ever put a dead slug in my boot again, I swear by the ancient roots of the Eldoria, I will mount your head on a pike." Gork, who had been hiding in a hollow log, peeked out, a hopeful grin on his face. "Ah, she likes to shout. Passionate, yes. Gork-like." His most baffling gift was a pair of slightly used adventurer boots, one significantly larger than the other, and both missing laces. He had found them near a freshly plundered supply wagon. Lyra simply stared at them, then at Gork, who presented them with a flourish. "For your feet, fair Lyra. So you run fast from dangers. Gork watches you," he declared, puffing out his chest. Lyra took a deep breath, counting to 10 in Elvish. "Gork," she said, her voice strained. "Those boots, they are not a gift. They are evidence of your thievery. And you watch me? That is called stalking." "Stalking, yes. Guide says attentive presence. Gork attentive," he chirped, totally missing the point. Lyra had half a mind to shoot an arrow right through his ridiculous pointy hat. But then she noticed the genuine, if incredibly misguided, sincerity in his beady eyes. He truly believed he was being charming. He truly believed these bizarre offerings were the peak of romantic courtship. And a tiny, exasperated part of her found it almost endearing. Almost. Her fellow rangers, noticing the strange detritus appearing on Lyra's patrol route, started asking questions. "Lyra, is that a dead badger on your porch? And why does it have a ribbon on it?" "It's nothing," Lyra would snap, burying the offending item with unusual fervor. She couldn't very well explain that an infatuated goblin was trying to woo her with forest refuse. It would be an insult to her pride as a Silverleaf Ranger. One evening, Gork decided to take a page from the guide about shared experiences. He stealthily followed Lyra on her night patrol. Lyra, whose senses were always heightened, immediately detected his clumsy presence. She led him on a wild goose chase through a patch of boggy marsh, hoping to deter him. Instead, Gork, thinking it was a romantic, moonlit stroll, splashed happily behind her, narrating his observations. "Look, Lyra. Mud squishes, very good for feet. And frog goes ribbit. Is that love sound?" Lyra nearly tripped over a root, gritting her teeth. "That is the sound of an amphibian, Gork. And this is not a stroll. This is a dangerous patrol." Despite her constant exasperation, Lyra found herself in a strange predicament. While Gork was undeniably annoying, he was also surprisingly harmless to her. He never tried to steal her gear, though he often tried to polish it with a dirty rag. He never set traps for her, though he once tried to surprise her with a tripwire made of vines, which she elegantly avoided. He simply was there. A persistent, green, lovesick pest. And in the silent, often lonely life of a ranger, Gork's absurd presence, his earnest, if misguided, attempts at connection, slowly began to chip away at her disdain. She still wanted to punt him into the next valley, but sometimes a faint, almost imperceptible twitch of her lips would betray a hint of amusement. The problem, Lyra realized, was not just Gork. The problem was her own unexpected inability to simply dispatch him. Her sword, usually swift and sure against goblin kind, seemed to freeze whenever it came to Gork. His sheer, unadulterated earnestness was, to her absolute horror, making him untouchable. Gork, ever the diligent student of romance, decided his attempts lacked a certain heroic flair. The guide spoke of acts of bravery, of rescuing the beloved from peril. Gork, however, wasn't exactly known for his bravery. He was known for his cowardice, his sneakiness, and his exceptional talent for tripping over his own feet. But for Lyra, Gork would be brave. He would be heroic. His first attempt at heroism involved a particularly grumpy badger. Lyra was tracking a suspicious scent when Gork, leaping from a bush with a rusty butter knife, charged the badger, screaming, "Fear not, fair Lyra! Gork, protect!" The badger, startled, promptly bit Gork on the nose. Lyra sighed, shot a warning arrow over the badger's head, and then reluctantly applied a poultice to Gork's bleeding snout. "You are an idiot, Gork," she muttered, carefully bandaging him. "That badger could have taken your whole face off." Gork, His nose throbbing, looked up at her with adoring eyes. "But Gork saved you, yes? Brave like big elf hero?" "No, Gork, you nearly became badger food. I saved you." His next attempt involved a rogue spider web that Lyra had already deftly avoided. Gork, seeing it, dramatically threw himself into the sticky strands, shouting, "Gork trapped! Lyra, save Gork!" Lyra, who was 3 trees ahead, simply turned, sighed, and spent 10 minutes painstakingly untangling a very sticky, very whiny goblin from the web. The situation came to a head when a small band of mountain trolls, larger and significantly more dangerous than goblins, strayed into the Whisperwind forest. Lyra was tracking them, her senses on high alert. Gork, unfortunately, decided this was his grand opportunity. He followed Lyra, armed with a bent spoon and a newfound conviction. When the trolls cornered Lyra in a small clearing, their crude clubs raised, Gork panicked. He didn't have a plan. He wasn't brave. He was just terrified. But then he saw Lyra, outnumbered but unyielding, her eyes narrowed in fierce determination. He saw the glint of fear in her eyes, fleeting but present. And something snapped in Gork. He didn't charge. He didn't fight. He did the only thing he knew he was good at, making a lot of noise and being utterly, irrevocably annoying. "Hey, ugly green bumps!" Gork shrieked, jumping out from behind a tree, waving his spoon. "You leave Lyra alone. She belongs to Gork. Gork make you regret." The trolls, surprised by this tiny, screeching green creature, paused. One of them, the largest, lumbered towards Gork, a confused scowl on its face. "What is this puny thing?" It rumbled, its voice like grinding stones. "Puny thing? I am Gork, lover of Lyra, destroyer of ugly trolls," Gork yelled, emboldened by his own sudden courage, and by the sheer idiocy of the situation. He proceeded to jump up and down, make rude goblin noises, and repeatedly hit the troll's shins with his bent spoon, which had absolutely no effect but was incredibly irritating. The trolls, bewildered by this unprecedented display of goblin idiocy, exchanged confused glances. Lyra, momentarily forgotten, watched in stunned disbelief as Gork continued his one-goblin assault, distracting the lumbering brutes with sheer, unadulterated annoyance. It bought her precious seconds. Seconds she used to knock 3 arrows swift and true. Thwip, thwip, thwip! 3 trolls crumpled, felled by Lyra's unerring aim. The remaining trolls, startled by the sudden casualties and thoroughly exasperated by the screeching goblin, decided this wasn't worth the hassle. They turned and lumbered away, leaving Gork standing triumphantly over his fallen, but not by him, foes. Lyra walked over to him, her bow still in hand, a complex mixture of emotions warring on her face. "Gork," she said, her voice quiet. "What in the blazes was that?" Gork, panting, puffed out his chest. "Gork, save you! Brave Gork, hero! Just like guides say." Lyra stared at him. He hadn't fought them. He hadn't even scratched them. But he had distracted them. He had put himself in harm's way for her. And for a brief, bewildering moment, Lyra felt a flicker of something that wasn't exasperation or annoyance. It was ingratitude, and to her utter dismay, a tiny, reluctant surge of affection. She still wanted to hit him with her bow, but it was now a gentle tap, not a forceful strike. "Come on." "You idiot," she said, holstering her bow. "Let's get out of here before more trolls show up. And next time leave the heroism to the professionals." Gork beamed. "She cares. She calls me idiot, but with soft voice." "Is love," Lyra just sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that only the ancient trees of the Whisperwind forest could truly appreciate. Word of the goblin's persistence and the ranger's inexplicable tolerance began to spread, albeit quietly through the elven patrols. Some attributed it to a strange fey curse, others to Lyra finally losing her mind. Lyra, meanwhile, found herself in an increasingly complicated dance with Gork. He was still annoying, still clumsy, still given to bizarre declarations of love and even more bizarre gifts. A particularly shiny, but definitely poisoned, mushroom made her reconsider her life choices. But he was also useful. He knew the goblins' movements, their secret paths, their weaknesses. He would sometimes warn her of ambushes, not out of loyalty to the elves, but out of a desperate desire to keep his Lyra safe. He even started to develop a rudimentary understanding of her patrol patterns, occasionally setting up little surprises for her, like a strategically placed and safely dead rabbit for her dinner, or a carefully cleared path through a thorny thicket. Lyra found herself relying on him against her better judgment. She would ask him questions about the goblin tribes, about the strange goings-on deep within the forest that only a creature of its underbelly would know. Their conversations, initially Gork's attempts at flirting and Lyra's attempts at interrogation, slowly evolved into something akin to a partnership. One afternoon, Lyra was ambushed by a particularly cunning band of forest brigands. She fought valiantly, but they were numerous. Just as she was about to be overwhelmed, Gork, who had been stalking her from a discreet distance, i.e., tripping loudly 100 yards back, sprang into action. He didn't engage in combat. Instead, he did what goblins do best: chaos. He set off a series of crude, noisy goblin traps, designed for small game, but surprisingly effective against clumsy brigands. Threw a jar of unusually pungent fermented berries, and generally created such a maddening distraction that the brigands, thoroughly disoriented and annoyed, fled. Lyra, catching her breath, looked at him. You saved me again, you ridiculous creature." Gork, covered in berry juice and beaming, preened. "Gork brave. Gork smart. Gork, you're goblin." Lyra actually truly genuinely smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, but it was there. And Gork saw it. He practically vibrated with joy. She smiles. She smiles at Gork. "This is big step," he whispered to himself. Recognizing the shift in their dynamic, Gork decided to delve deeper into the guide. It spoke of shared interests and understanding one's beloved's world. Gork, realizing Lyra's world was the forest, decided to learn about the forest. He started asking her questions, surprisingly insightful ones, about the plants, the animals, the ancient trees. Lyra found herself teaching him, albeit reluctantly at first. She showed him how to identify edible berries and poisonous ones with a pointed look at his past gifts. She taught him about tracking, about the delicate balance of the forest ecosystem. Gork, to her surprise, was an eager student. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, his beady eyes wide with fascination. One day, Lyra was struggling to mend a torn section of her leather armor, the intricate leaf-weaving beyond her current skill. Gork, watching her, suddenly piped up. "Lyra needs help. Gork knows leaf weavers. They good with sticky stuff and sharp needles." Lyra stared at him. "You know goblin leaf weavers?" "Yes. Gork's cousin's uncle's friend." "Very good," hesitantly Lyra agreed. Gork led her to a hidden, surprisingly clean goblin den, where an ancient, wizened goblin with surprisingly nimble fingers expertly mended her armor, incorporating a subtle, almost invisible leaf pattern that mimicked the forest itself. Lyra was astonished. She had never known goblins possessed such delicate artistry. "See, Lyra?" Gork said proudly. "Goblins not just smash. Goblins also make pretty things. For Lyra." Lyra looked at the mended armor, then at Gork, who was beaming with pride. She felt a profound shift within her. Her disdain for goblins, once an unshakable pillar of her worldview, was beginning to crumble. She was seeing them not just as a collective menace, but as individuals with their own skills, their own quirks, and even in Gork's case, their own absurd charm. Her heart, once a fortress against emotion, felt a strange new warmth. The line between duty and forbidden desire blurred further until it was almost invisible. She knew she was falling, slowly and reluctantly, for the most exasperating, most endearing goblin in the entire Whisperwind forest. And the terrifying part? She wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The Whisperwind forest was slowly but surely changing. The subtle influence of Lyra and Gork's unlikely partnership began to ripple through its delicate ecosystem. Gork, having learned about tracking and forest ecology from Lyra, actually started to discourage his goblin tribe from their more destructive habits, much to their confusion. He'd point out the importance of not over-harvesting certain berries, or the danger of angering a particular family of grumpy badgers, an experience he remembered vividly. Lyra, in turn, found herself spending less time actively hunting down goblins and more time redirecting them, or even on rare occasions striking deals. If a goblin tribe promised to stop raiding elven mushroom farms, she might turn a blind eye to their illicit berry picking. This created a highly unusual, unofficial truce along their shared border, but their personal relationship deepened. Lyra found herself seeking Gork out, not just for information, but for his company. His bizarre worldview, once infuriating, was now a source of endless amusement. His constant off-key serenades, once a torture, now felt like a strangely comforting background hum. And his ridiculous gifts, while still occasionally involving slugs, also included surprisingly well-preserved bird feathers and curiously shaped river stones. "This one looks like your nose, Lyra." "So sharp, Gork loves your nose," he'd declare, presenting her with a triangular rock. Lyra would roll her eyes, but she would keep the rock. She had a small pile of Gork's treasures hidden in her lean-to, a collection of pebbles, feathers, and oddly shaped bits of bark that she would never admit to owning. One evening, Lyra allowed Gork to join her on a patrol that led through one of the most beautiful, ancient glades in the elven territory, a place of shimmering moonlight and luminescent moss. Gork, accustomed to the dim, muddy confines of goblin tunnels, gasped, "Pretty!" So pretty," he whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Lyra, you live in Magic Place." Lyra looked at the glade, then at Gork's awestruck face. She suddenly saw her world through his eyes, a place of magic and beauty she had perhaps begun to take for granted. "It is," she agreed, a softness in her voice she rarely used. Gork, emboldened by her unusual gentleness, did something unprecedented. He reached out and very, very gently took her hand. His hand was rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. Lyra tensed, ready to pull away, ready to scold him. But then she felt the simple, earnest sincerity of his touch, and she found herself not pulling away. "Lyra's hand is soft," Gork murmured, running his thumb over her knuckles. "Not like Gork's hand, but Gork like it." Lyra looked at their joined hands in the moonlight, a slender, elegant elven hand intertwined with a rough green goblin one. It was a sight that would send shivers of disgust through any other elf, any other goblin. But here in this quiet moonlit glade, it felt right. She cleared her throat, trying to regain some semblance of her usual stoicism. "Don't get any ideas, Gork," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Gork just beamed, squeezing her hand slightly. "No ideas, Lyra, just Gork like you. Gork want to be with you." Lyra sighed, a sound that was less exasperation and more resignation. She was, irrevocably, helplessly, utterly in love with the most annoying, most charming, most unlikely creature in the entire Whisperwind forest. Her disdain had crumbled. Her duty had bent, and her heart, once a stoic fortress, had finally surrendered to the persistent, green onslaught of Gork's absurd affection. The problem, Lyra realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity, was no longer her inability to kill him. The problem was what would happen if anyone else found out. A Silverleaf Ranger in love with a goblin? It was an unthinkable scandal. A career-ending, potentially life-ending disgrace. But as Gork, still holding her hand, began to hum a surprisingly less terrible, though still off-key version of his original love song, Lyra found she didn't care. Not entirely. Not when his small, rough hand felt so comforting in hers, and his beady, earnest eyes looked at her with such pure, unadulterated adoration. Their love was a secret, a delicate, ridiculous bloom in the heart of the forest. And Lyra, the stoic elven ranger, was ready to defend it with the same ferocity she used to defend Eldoria, even if it meant facing the wrath of her own people. Because some loves, however absurd, were worth fighting for. Even a love that began with slugs in boots and ended with a goblin holding her hand in a moonlit glade. Lyra's colleagues, while not privy to the full extent of her unusual relationship, had certainly noticed her increasingly peculiar behavior. Her patrols were longer, her disposition was softer, and the occasional discarded goblin-made trinket, a polished, though still slightly greasy rock, found its way near her camp. Whispers began to circulate amongst the Silverleaf Rangers. "Lyra's gone soft. The woods are getting to her. Perhaps she's been cursed." Lyra deflected their questions with practiced ease, but the guilt gnawed at her. Her duty was paramount, her loyalty to Eldoria absolute. Yet her heart now belonged in part to a goblin who, despite his best efforts, was still fundamentally a goblin, prone to mischief, crude humor, and an alarming disregard for personal hygiene. Gork, for his part, was blissfully unaware of the social implications of their burgeoning romance. He simply saw Lyra as his Lyra, the beautiful, strong elf who sometimes let him hold her hand and didn't immediately try to string him up. He continued his attempts at courtship, now with a slightly more refined, but still very goblin-ish, touch. He tried to mimic Lyra's quiet demeanor, often sitting beside her in companionable silence, until he inevitably broke it with a comment like, "Lyra smells like pine needles." Gork likes that smell. Gork also likes smell of rotting meat, but Lyra's smell better. Lyra would sigh, but a small smile would tug at her lips. She had come to appreciate his honesty, his utter lack of guile. With Gork, what you saw was exactly what you got. One afternoon, while Lyra was teaching Gork about tracking elusive forest deer, they stumbled upon a human hunting party that had strayed too far into the forest. These were not innocent villagers, but rough, heavily armed men known for poaching and their general disregard for the delicate balance of the woods. They were tracking a rare, protected white-heart stag. Lyra knew they had to be stopped. She prepared to intercept them, but then she saw Gork. His instincts, sharpened by centuries of goblin survival, immediately recognized the danger. He didn't hesitate. Humans? Bad humans. Gork shrieked, launching himself from a bush, not at the humans, but at the white-heart stag itself. He then proceeded to tackle the confused animal, sending it scattering deeper into the forest, away from the hunters. The humans, startled by the sudden appearance of a screaming goblin tackling their prey, cursed and raised their bows. Lyra, seizing the moment, emerged from the trees, her own bow drawn, an arrow nocked. "These lands are protected," she stated, her voice cold and firm. "Leave now or face the consequences." The humans, recognizing the emblem of a silverleaf ranger, hesitated. They knew the prowess of the elves. After a tense standoff, they grumbled and retreated, their poaching attempt foiled. Lyra turned to Gork, who was now sheepishly helping the slightly dazed Whiteheart to its feet. You risked yourself to save the stag," she said, a new respect dawning in her eyes. "Why?" Gork shrugged, scratching his head. "Lyra teach Gork. Forest good. Animals need protection. Gork helps Lyra." He was still a goblin, with his crude ways and his penchant for bad poetry, but he was her goblin. He was learning. He was growing. And he was proving, time and again, that his heart, however small and green, was capable of acts of genuine good. This encounter cemented Lyra's decision. She would face the scrutiny, the condemnation, the raised eyebrows of her people. She would find a way to make this work. Their love, however improbable, was real, and it was making her and perhaps even the forest itself better. The delicate balance Lyra and Gork had established was inevitably put to the test. A severe blight began to spread from the darkest, most ancient parts of the Whisperwind Forest, a corruption even more potent than the regular malevolence they typically faced. It withered trees, sickened animals, and caused patches of the forest to die outright. This was not the work of mere goblin mischief or stray human poachers. This was something deeper, something ancient, and truly dangerous. The Silverleaf Rangers mobilized. This was a threat to all of Eldoria. Lyra, now on full alert, found herself leading patrols deeper into the infected areas, confronting shadow blight creatures and ancient corrupted flora. Gork, seeing the severity of the threat, knew he had to help Lyra. He couldn't just stand by. He knew these deeper, older parts of the forest better than any elf, having delved into their shadowed depths for years in search of shiny baubles and forgotten tunnels. He found Lyra on the front lines, battling a particularly aggressive blight elemental, its tendrils lashing out. "Lyra, this way! Gork knows secret path!" he shouted, pointing to a barely visible crevice in the rocks. "Gork knows where bad magic comes from." Lyra, overwhelmed, trusted him without a second thought. She followed Gork, her rangers trailing behind, bewildered by the sight of their formidable commander taking orders from a goblin. Gork led them through a series of twisting, hidden tunnels, deep beneath the blighted forest, bypassing hordes of corrupted creatures. They emerged into an ancient, cavernous chamber, its walls pulsating with dark, sickly green light. At its center was a massive, gnarled root system, glowing with the blight's virulent energy, drawing power from the very heart of the earth. This was the source. The blight. "It's feeding on an ancient ley line," Lyra realized, her eyes widening. "We have to sever its connection." But the chamber was guarded by a powerful blight guardian, a monstrous tree-like entity pulsing with corrupted magic. Lyra and her rangers engaged it, their sun-enchanted blades cutting through its thorny hide, but it was relentless. Gork, seeing the overwhelming power of the guardian, knew he couldn't fight it head-on. He looked around the chamber, his goblin mind whirring. He saw loose rocks, crumbling support beams, and a precarious stack of ancient petrified logs. "Gork has idea," he shrieked, running towards the weak points, heedless of the danger. "Gork, make it fall. Smash bad roots." He began frantically scrambling. prying at loose stones, kicking at rotting timbers, his small green body a blur of motion. The Rangers, fighting the Guardian, watched him in astonishment. The Blight Guardian, distracted by the annoying Goblin, lashed out a tendril, catching Gork and sending him flying. "Gork!" Lyra cried, her heart seizing with fear. But Gork, battered but undeterred, picked himself up. He saw the Guardian momentarily vulnerable. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he hurled a large, jagged rock at a crucial support beam. Crack! The ancient log pile above gave way, cascading down onto the colossal root system, severing its connection to the ley line. The Blight Guardian shrieked, its form flickering, weakening. The sickly green light in the chamber began to dim. Lyra and her Rangers, renewed, pressed their attack. With the source of its power cut off, the Guardian quickly fell, crumbling into dust. The Blight, deprived of its root, began to recede. The cavern slowly filled with a soft, natural light, the malevolence draining away. Gork, bruised and exhausted, limped towards Lyra, who rushed to his side. She knelt, her hands gently examining his cuts and scrapes. You saved us all, Gork," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved the forest." Gork, panting, grinned up at her. "Gork, protect Lyra. Gork, protect forest. Is good, yes?" The other Rangers, initially stunned, now looked at Gork with a new understanding. This wasn't just a goblin. This was Lyra's goblin. This was the goblin who, in his own ridiculously chaotic way, had just saved them all. Later, as the blight was fully purged and the Whisperwind Forest began its slow, vibrant recovery, Lyra faced her fellow Rangers. She spoke of Gork's bravery, his knowledge, his ingenuity. She spoke of how he had seen the blight when they could not, how he had led them to its source, how he had, against all odds, been their salvation. There was still wariness, still suspicion, but it was now tempered with grudging respect. Gork, the absurd poetry-loving goblin, had earned his place not just in Lyra's heart, but in the annals of the Whisperwind Forest's protectors. Lyra looked at Gork, who was standing beside her, preening slightly, trying very hard not to pick his nose. He was still a goblin, but he was her goblin, and she wouldn't have him any other way. Their love was no longer a secret. It was an anomaly, a marvel, a testament to the unexpected connections forged in the most unlikely of places. It was a love that began with a terrible serenade and a dead slug, and blossomed into an unlikeliest alliance, proving that even a grumpy elven ranger and an articulate goblin could find their happily ever after, one chaotic, loving moment at a time. The storyteller's compass pointed towards a future where love, however peculiar, truly conquered all.